The moon hung low over the Cascade Mountains, casting silver shadows through ancient Douglas firs that had witnessed 2 centuries of bloodshed. King Thaddeus Ravencroft stood at the edge of the northern ridge, his steel-gray eyes scanning the darkness with the predatory focus that had kept him alive for 224 years. Tonight felt different. Wrong. The air carried a tension that made his wolf stir uneasily beneath his skin. For 179 years, he had ruled the werewolf territories stretching from Washington to Northern California with absolute authority. His reputation was carved in blood and fear exactly as it should be. Power demanded respect, and respect was earned through strength, never through mercy. He had learned that lesson young, learned it with his father's blood on his hands during the ritual combat that had crowned him king in 1845. The world had changed around him. Empires had risen and fallen. Wars had swept across continents. Technology had transformed human society beyond recognition. But the fundamental truth of leadership remained constant. Show weakness and challengers would tear you apart. Show mercy and enemies would exploit it. Show vulnerability and death would find you in the dark. Tonight's patrol had been routine. 12 of his best warriors, a sweep of the border territories where resistance activity had been increasing. The Ashmont rebels, remnants of an old bloodline his predecessors had tried to erase during the purges, had been growing bolder in recent months. Small raids, supply line disruptions, nothing he couldn't handle with overwhelming force. But this ambush was different, coordinated, professional, military precision that spoke of training and discipline far beyond the usual rebel tactics. The attack came from 3 sides simultaneously. Silver bullets, each one forged with wolfsbane poison, fired from elevated positions his scouts had somehow missed. His warriors fell back into defensive formation, exactly as trained, returning fire with automatic weapons that lit up the forest like lightning strikes. Thaddeus moved through the chaos with the fluid grace of centuries of combat experience. He had survived the Civil War, both world wars, countless territorial disputes, and assassination attempts. This should have been just another skirmish in an endless series of conflicts. Then pain exploded in his ribs, white hot, burning with intensity that drove him to one knee. He looked down and saw the entry wound already weeping black blood. Silver, the ancient bane of his kind, mixed with something worse. Wolfsbane extract, concentrated and refined, spreading through his bloodstream like acid through paper. Colonel Garrett Ironwood, his second in command for 98 years, materialized at his side. The attack was already faltering, the ambushers melting back into the forest as quickly as they had appeared. A hit-and-run strike. Not meant to win territory, but to kill him specifically. Someone had studied his patterns, anticipated his movements, known exactly where he would be and when. That knowledge was more dangerous than any weapon. Garrett's face showed the professional calm of a man who had seen too much death to panic, but Thaddeus could read the fear beneath. The wound was bad. The poison was spreading fast. Already his legendary healing was faltering, his body struggling against the toxin corrupting his system. His wolf, usually a constant presence in his mind, had gone silent, retreating from the silver's corrupting touch, pulling deeper into survival mode. Without his wolf, he was just a man with a mortal wound dying in the darkness. Pride made the decision for him. Better to walk into the forest alone than show this weakness before his warriors. Better to die with dignity than let them see their invincible king brought low by a coward's weapon. The irony wasn't lost on him that his own philosophy of never showing vulnerability might be the thing that killed him. He pushed Garrett away with a growl that came out weaker than intended, gave orders through gritted teeth. Secure the perimeter, return to the fortress, report the attack. He would follow shortly once he had assessed the damage properly. The lie tasted bitter, but Garrett accepted it because loyalty demanded he accept it. Because questioning his king in front of the others would be insubordination. Because 179 years of absolute authority meant his word was law, even when that word was obviously false. Thaddeus turned and walked into the forest. Each step required concentration, willpower, forcing his legs to move when his body wanted to collapse. The poison was winning, shutting down his systems one by one. His vision blurred, his hearing dulled. His sense of direction wavered, the forest becoming a maze of shadows and moonlight. He had sent so many to similar fates, had shown no mercy to those who challenged his rule. Perhaps this was the universe's way of balancing the scales, letting him experience the same lonely death he had inflicted on countless others. His legs finally gave out near a massive Douglas fir, centuries old, its bark rough against his palm, as he slid down to sit in the moss and dead leaves. Blood soaked through his tactical vest, black and viscous in the moonlight. The poison burned through his chest, each breath sending fresh waves of agony through his ribs. Over 200 years, he had survived everything history could throw at him, and now he would die alone in the forest, killed by an enemy he had never even seen clearly. The sound of footsteps approaching through the undergrowth made him reach instinctively for the knife at his belt, but his fingers were too numb to grip the handle. If this was an assassin coming to finish the job, there was nothing he could do to stop them. The footsteps stopped just beyond his field of vision. Light, deliberate, not the heavy tread of a warrior, but something softer, more careful. Then a voice spoke, quiet and musical, with an accent that marked it as local but refined. Not the rough speech of forest rebels, but educated, cultured. "You're dying." Not a question, a statement of medical fact delivered with professional detachment. Thaddeus tried to focus, tried to see who was speaking, but his vision was fading, darkness creeping in from the edges. He managed a sound that might have been agreement or defiance. He couldn't tell which. The poison is silver-based, bonded with concentrated wolfsbane extract. It's binding to your DNA, preventing your regeneration. Without intervention, you have perhaps 20 minutes before complete system failure. The clinical precision of the diagnosis cut through his pain-fogged mind. This wasn't a warrior. This was a doctor, a healer, someone who understood exactly what was killing him and how fast it would work. She moved into his line of sight then, and even through the haze of approaching death, he could see that she was extraordinary. Dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in waves that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. Skin pale as cream, luminous in the darkness. And her eyes, those impossible eyes, violet, deep and endless as twilight itself, glowing with their own inner light. No werewolf had eyes that color. No creature he knew of possessed such an otherworldly gaze. Magic. Real magic, the kind that had supposedly died out during the purges of the 1970s, when his father had systematically hunted down and destroyed every bloodline that carried abilities beyond standard shapeshifting. She should have been afraid of him. Even wounded, even dying, he was dangerous. His reputation alone should have sent her running. But instead she looked at him with something like sadness, as if his condition genuinely pained her, as if she cared whether he lived or died. Her hands moved to his wound without hesitation, pressing against the torn flesh. He felt something flow from her touch, something ancient and powerful that had nothing to do with werewolf healing. The pain intensified for a moment, became so overwhelming he nearly lost consciousness. Then suddenly it began to recede. The burning sensation of the poison faded, replaced by warmth that spread through his chest and into his limbs. He could feel his wolf stirring again, weak but present, no longer retreating from the silver's corruption. The toxin was being driven out, purged from his system by magic that should not exist. Her eyes were closed now, her face a mask of concentration. She was glowing, actually glowing, with soft, violet light that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. The light intensified, became almost blinding, and he felt the poison break apart and dissolve, rendered harmless by her power. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. Time lost meaning in that cocoon of violet light and ancient magic. All that existed was her touch, her power flowing into him, rebuilding what the poison had destroyed. Finally, her hands lifted from his chest. The glow faded, leaving them in moonlit darkness once more. Thaddeus looked down at his ribs, expecting to see the gaping wound still weeping black blood. Instead, he found smooth skin, slightly pink, as if freshly healed, but otherwise perfect. The poison was gone, completely, purged from his system. He felt stronger than he had in hours, possibly stronger than before the ambush. He looked up at his savior, 1,000 questions forming on his lips. Who was she? What was she? Why had she saved him? But his voice came out as barely a whisper, his body still recovering from its brush with death. She smiled, then just a slight curve of her lips, and it transformed her face from merely beautiful to absolutely radiant, like the sun breaking through storm clouds, like hope incarnate. But she offered no explanation, no name, no reason for her intervention. Instead, she simply turned and walked back into the forest, moving with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, her form blending with the shadows until he couldn't tell where she ended and the darkness began. Thaddeus tried to stand, tried to follow, but his legs were still too weak, his body still too drained from the healing. By the time he managed to get to his feet, she was gone, vanished into the woods as completely as if she had never existed. Only the faint scent of wild roses and something else, something indefinable and intoxicating, lingered in the air to prove she had been real. He stood there for a long moment, breathing in that fading scent, committing it to memory, with the intensity that had made him a legendary tracker. His hand pressed against his healed ribs, feeling the warmth that still emanated from where she had touched him. Something had changed in that moment of healing, something beyond the physical. He had felt a connection brief but undeniable, like a spark of recognition between souls that had known each other across lifetimes. It was ridiculous, impossible. He didn't believe in such romantic nonsense, didn't believe in fate or destiny or soulmates. He believed in power and strategy and the cold calculus of survival. And yet the feeling persisted, gnawing at him with uncomfortable insistence. Garrett found him 20 minutes later, leading a search party through the forest with the grim efficiency of men expecting to recover a body. Their faces showed relief and confusion in equal measure when they saw him standing uninjured, looking healthier than when the patrol had started. Garrett's questions came immediately. What had happened? How had he survived the poison? The silver should have been fatal without immediate medical intervention, and there were no facilities within miles capable of treating such a wound. Thaddeus found himself reluctant to explain. Something about the encounter felt private, sacred even, and he wasn't ready to share it with anyone. The mystery woman who had saved his life, who had violated every law of nature with her impossible magic, who had looked at him with sadness rather than fear. So he lied. Said he had managed to purge the poison himself using an old technique he had learned decades ago. It was a thin lie, one that Garrett clearly didn't believe, given the skeptical look in his weathered eyes. But loyalty kept the colonel from pushing further, kept him from questioning his king's obvious deception. They returned to the fortress in silence, Thaddeus's mind lost in thoughts of violet eyes and impossible magic. The Ravencroft fortress rose from the mountainside like a crown of steel and stone, its towers piercing the night sky, its walls fortified by generations of paranoia and preparation. Originally built in the 1850s as a military installation, Thaddeus had acquired and modified it over the decades, transforming it into a monument to werewolf supremacy, a statement of permanent dominance over the territories he controlled. It should have felt like home. It was the seat of his power, the symbol of everything he had built. But tonight, as he walked through its halls toward his private chambers, it felt less like a home and more like a prison, cold and empty despite the hundreds of pack members who lived within its walls. His near-death experience had shaken something loose in him, made him aware of an emptiness he had been ignoring for decades. Power and fear had been enough for so long, but suddenly they felt hollow, insufficient to fill the void that yawned inside his chest. He dismissed his guards once he reached his rooms, wanting solitude to process everything that had happened. The chambers were exactly as he had left them that morning. Austere and functional, decorated with weapons and trophies from past conquests, rather than anything resembling comfort or personality. Everything necessary, nothing frivolous. The living space of a man who had no life beyond his role as king. He moved to the window that overlooked the forest, staring out at the dark expanse of trees that stretched to the horizon. Was she still out there somewhere, watching him perhaps, or already miles away, having forgotten their encounter entirely? The thought that she might not remember, might not have felt that same spark of connection bothered him more than it should. He was Thaddeus Ravencroft, AlphaKing, answerable to no one. Certainly not affected by a brief meeting with a mysterious stranger, no matter how beautiful or powerful she might be. But even as he tried to convince himself of his indifference, his mind kept returning to her, to the gentleness in her touch, to the sadness in her expression as she looked at him. She had known who he was. That much was clear. And yet she had saved him anyway. That suggested either incredible foolishness or incredible courage. Possibly both. Most people in the territories feared him, hated him, or both. Respect was universal, but affection was non-existent. He had always told himself that was fine, that love was a weakness he couldn't afford. Leaders who were loved could be manipulated through that affection, could be made soft and vulnerable. Better to be feared to maintain absolute control through strength rather than sentiment. It was a philosophy his father had drilled into him from childhood, reinforced through brutal lessons about the cost of mercy. Every act of kindness was punished. Every moment of vulnerability was exploited, until he had learned to build walls around himself so thick that nothing could penetrate them. Yet his mysterious savior had shown him mercy, had risked herself to heal someone she should have left to die. And that act of compassion haunted him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. He pressed his palm against the cool glass of the window, his reflection staring back at him. For the first time in decades, he saw something in his own eyes that looked almost like longing. He wanted to see her again, needed to understand who she was and why she had done what she did. More than that, though, he wanted to experience again that moment of connection, that brief flash of something that felt almost like recognition, like coming home to a place he hadn't known he was missing. It terrified him more than any enemy ever had. Emotions were dangerous. Attachments could be used against him. And yet he couldn't stop thinking about her, couldn't stop craving another moment in her presence. The next morning, Thaddeus called a council meeting, gathering his most trusted advisors in the Great Hall. The room was designed to intimidate with high ceilings, supported by massive columns walls decorated with weapons taken from defeated enemies, and a throne of black marble that elevated him above everyone else in the space. His council filed in with their usual mixture of respect and apprehension. Garrett was there along with Vivian Sterling, his director of intelligence, Thomas Blackwell, who commanded his military forces, and Helena Whitmore, who managed relations with the lesser pacts that paid tribute to Ravencroft authority. Each had served him for decades, had proven their loyalty through blood and sacrifice. And yet he trusted none of them completely. Trust was another luxury he couldn't afford, another potential weakness that enemies could exploit. He began the meeting by addressing the ambush, describing the attack in clinical detail, while carefully omitting any mention of his mysterious healer. His survival, he claimed, was due to his own resilience and an experimental antidote he had been developing for silver poisoning. Another lie, but one that fit the narrative of his invincibility better than the truth would have. Vivian reported that her intelligence network had identified the attackers as members of the Ashmont Resistance, a group that had been growing bolder in recent months, conducting raids on supply lines and encouraging lesser pacts to withhold their tributes. The Ashmonts were remnants of an old bloodline, one that his father had supposedly eliminated during the purges of the 1970s, a systematic campaign to destroy any werewolf clan that possessed magical abilities beyond standard shapeshifting. The mention of the Ashmont name made something click in Thaddeus's mind, a connection he hadn't considered before. If the Ashmonts weren't as extinct as everyone believed, if survivors had been hiding in the wilderness for generations, then perhaps his healer was one of them. It would explain the magic she possessed, the ancient power that no modern werewolf retained. It would also mean she was his enemy, daughter or descendant of the very people who had tried to kill him last night. The irony was almost amusing that the person who saved his life was connected to those who had nearly ended it. Almost amusing, but mostly it complicated everything in ways that made his head hurt. If she was an Ashmont, finding her meant infiltrating the resistance, and that required a subtlety his reputation didn't accommodate. He gave Vivian new orders: intensify surveillance on known resistance sympathizers, increase the bounty on Ashmont rebels. But also, and this he phrased carefully, bring in anyone captured alive rather than executing them immediately. He needed information, he explained, needed to understand the resistance structure and leadership before crushing it completely. It was a reasonable justification, one that his council accepted without question. But the real reason was simpler and more selfish. He needed to find her, needed to look into those ancient eyes again and understand what had passed between them in the forest. The obsession was already taking root, becoming something he couldn't ignore or suppress. And Thaddeus Ravencroft had learned long ago that when he wanted something, he took it, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences. 6 weeks passed in a blur of frustration and mounting obsession. Vivian's intelligence network scoured the territories, following every lead, interrogating every suspect, but found no trace of a woman matching his healer's description. The Ashmont rebels remained elusive, striking at supply convoys and border outposts before vanishing into the wilderness like smoke. Thaddeus threw himself into the search with an intensity that bordered on madness. He personally led patrols into the forest, tracking scents that might be hers, investigating reports of strange magic or unusual sightings. His council began to worry, whispered among themselves about their king's strange fixation, but none dared question him directly. He was still Thaddeus Ravencroft, still the most powerful alpha in the realm. And his authority remained absolute, even if his judgment seemed compromised. It was during one of these patrols, 6 weeks after the ambush, that Vivienne's network finally found something concrete. A small village on the northern border had been providing supplies to the resistance, funneling food and medicine to hidden camps in exchange for protection from bandits and raiders. The intelligence report landed on his desk with details that made his pulse quicken. Among the supplies being moved was a significant quantity of medical equipment and rare herbs, the kind used by skilled healers, the kind someone with ancient magical knowledge might request. Thaddeus decided to investigate personally rather than sending his usual enforcers. Something told him this was it, that she would be there, that his search was finally coming to an end. The village was small and poor. A collection of wooden houses clustered around a central well, home to maybe 200 werewolves who scraped out a living through farming and hunting. They scattered when his patrol arrived, terrified of what his presence meant. Everyone knew his reputation for harsh punishment of any collaboration with rebels. He found her in the village healer's cottage, tending to a child with a fever. Her hands glowed with that same violet light he had seen in the forest, magic flowing from her fingers into the small body, driving out sickness with the same gentle power she had used to save his life. For a moment he could only stare, transfixed by the confirmation that she was real, that he hadn't imagined or exaggerated her beauty and power. She looked exactly as he remembered. Dark hair, pale skin, those impossible eyes that seemed to see straight through him. She looked up at his entrance, and their gazes met across the room. He saw recognition flash in those violet depths, followed immediately by fear and something else. Something that looked almost like regret, as if she had known this moment would come and had been dreading it. The child's mother was there too, along with an elderly woman who must have been the village healer. Both of them froze in terror at the sight of the AlphaKing standing in their doorway. His guards had surrounded the cottage, cutting off any escape, and he knew she understood that running was impossible. He dismissed the mother and the elderly healer with a gesture, his eyes never leaving his mysterious savior. They fled gratefully, taking the child with them, leaving the two of them alone in the small cottage filled with herbs and medical supplies. She straightened to her full height, which still left her more than a head shorter than him, and faced him with a courage he had to admire. There was fear in her expression, yes, but also defiance. A refusal to cower that reminded him of his own stubbornness. She spoke first, her voice the same musical tone he remembered from the forest. Direct, almost challenging. "So, you found me. Did you come to arrest me or simply to satisfy your curiosity?" The question surprised him into a moment of honesty. "I don't know. I've been searching for you since that night. I needed to understand why you saved me." She laughed at that, a bitter sound without humor. "You really don't know. You truly can't guess why someone might show mercy even to an enemy." The rebuke stung more than it should have, forced him to confront the reality that his reputation was built on cruelty. That mercy was so foreign to his rule that even receiving it confused him. He stepped further into the cottage, noting the herbs hanging from the rafters, the mortar and pestle on the workbench, the simple furnishings that spoke of a life dedicated to healing rather than power. This was who she was. Not a warrior or assassin, but a healer. Someone who saved lives as naturally as he took them. "Tell me your name." It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. But instead of cowering, she lifted her chin and met his gaze directly. "Dr. Alara Ashmont, daughter of Commander Rowan Ashmont, leader of the resistance that seeks to overthrow your rule and restore the old ways." The confirmation of her identity should have changed everything, should have made her his prisoner, immediately a valuable hostage to use against her father. But instead it only deepened his fascination. She was everything he should hate, everything his family had spent generations trying to destroy. And yet standing before her, he felt no hatred, only an overwhelming desire to understand her, to bridge the impossible gap between them. "What do you plan to do now?" she asked, and there was resignation in her voice, as if she had already accepted capture as inevitable. as if she had made peace with whatever fate awaited her. Will you kill me to send a message to my father? Use me as leverage, or simply lock me away and forget I exist? The words came out before he had fully considered their implications. None of those things. I have no intention of harming you. She looked skeptical, and he couldn't blame her. You've built your entire reputation on exactly such actions. Mercy isn't something the AlphaKing is known for. He couldn't argue with that assessment, couldn't deny the blood on his hands, the cruelty that had defined his reign. But he also couldn't reconcile the image of himself as a monster with the woman standing before him who had saved his life for no reason beyond basic compassion. Why did you do it? He asked, and the question came out rougher than intended. Why did you heal me when leaving me to die would have served your cause far better? Her answer was simple and devastating in its honesty. I couldn't watch you suffer when I had the power to help. Healing isn't something I can turn off based on politics or history. It's who I am. That philosophy stood in such stark contrast to his own worldview that he didn't know how to process it. He had spent centuries believing that survival demanded ruthlessness, that showing mercy was the same as showing weakness, that power could only be maintained through fear. Yet here was someone who possessed incredible power magic that could probably kill as easily as it healed. And she chose compassion over vengeance. Every single time. It challenged everything he thought he knew about strength and leadership. You're coming with me, he said finally, back to the fortress. Panic flashed across her face. She started to protest, to argue that taking her would accomplish nothing beyond enraging her father further, but he raised a hand, cutting her off. Not as a prisoner, as a guest, under my protection. The distinction seemed meaningless to her. She pointed out that his protection was the same as captivity if she couldn't leave, that being a guest in his fortress was still being held against her will. But he argued that staying in the village was no longer safe, that Vivian's network had already identified this location and more raids would follow. If she wanted to continue healing people, she would need the resources and security that only the fortress could provide. It was manipulation, certainly, using her compassion against her to get what he wanted. But he told himself it was also practical, that bringing her into his household was the best way to keep her safe while he figured out what to do about the impossible situation they found themselves in. Elara studied him for a long moment, seeing far too much. Reading intentions, he wasn't sure he fully understood himself. Finally, she agreed, but on one condition, that he allow her to send a message to her father explaining her choice, making clear that she wasn't betraying the resistance, but simply trying to survive. Thaddeus agreed to the condition, though he knew the message would be seen as collaboration regardless of how she phrased it. Knew that bringing her to the fortress would be viewed as either a hostage situation or a defection by both sides of this conflict. The political ramifications would be severe, the risks enormous. But he found he didn't care about any of that nearly as much as he cared about keeping her close, about having the chance to understand this woman who had turned his worldview upside down with a single act of healing. They traveled to the fortress that same day, Elara riding beside him rather than in chains as his guards clearly expected. He could see the confusion and concern on his warriors' faces. Could imagine the rumors that would spread through the pack within hours of their arrival. The AlphaKing had brought home an Ashmont, daughter of his greatest enemy, and installed her in the fortress as a guest rather than a prisoner. It was unprecedented, possibly insane, and absolutely guaranteed to cause political chaos. But as they rode through the gates and he saw the way the afternoon sunlight caught in her dark hair, turned her pale skin luminous, he couldn't bring himself to regret the decision. For the first time in 179 years of rule, Thaddeus Ravencroft had chosen something for himself rather than for strategic advantage. And somehow that felt like the most dangerous thing he had ever done. Garrett met them at the fortress gates, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes communicating volumes of worry and disapproval. Thaddeus ignored the unspoken censure, simply instructed his second to prepare chambers for their guest in the East Wing. Rooms that were comfortable but also easily monitored, a compromise between hospitality and security that satisfied neither objective particularly well. He walked Elara to her new quarters, personally aware of every eye watching them, every whisper following in their wake. The fortress had become a fishbowl, and they were the main attraction. Two people who should have been enemies walking side by side through halls that had never known anything but absolute authority and unquestioned obedience. The rooms he had assigned her were beautiful, decorated in soft greens and golds, with windows overlooking the gardens and a private bathroom that most pack members would envy. Someone had hurriedly arranged fresh flowers on the table, probably thinking it would soften the reality of what this was. Elara took in her surroundings with an unreadable expression, running her fingers over the silk curtains, the carved furniture, the luxury that surrounded her. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. Luxury doesn't make a cage any less confining. Beautiful chains are still chains. He accepted the rebuke without argument, acknowledged that yes, she was essentially his prisoner, regardless of the terminology he preferred, but insisted that this situation was better than the alternatives available to both of them. Better than her father attempting a rescue that would result in bloodshed on both sides. Better than Vivian's people finding her unprotected in some forest camp. Better than the emptiness he had felt for the past 6 weeks not knowing if he would ever see her again. He didn't say that last part. Some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud. He left her to settle in posted guards outside her door, with strict instructions that she was to be treated with respect and provided anything she requested within reason. Then he retreated to his own chambers and tried to process everything that had just happened. Tried to understand why he had just committed political suicide by bringing an enemy into his house and heart. Because that's what this was. He could no longer deny it to himself, even if he maintained the fiction for everyone else. He was falling for her. Had probably been falling since that moment in the forest when she touched him and drove the poison from his body. It was dangerous and foolish and potentially fatal, but it was also undeniable. A force of nature he had no more chance of stopping than he could halt the moon in its path across the sky. Over the following days, a strange routine developed in the fortress. Elara spent her mornings in the gardens tending to herbs she had requested for her healing work. Her afternoons were devoted to a workroom he had set up for her, creating medicines and treating servants who came to her with various ailments. She never asked to leave the fortress, never attempted escape, but he could see the longing in her gaze when she looked toward the forest, the homesickness that she tried to hide behind busy activity, the quiet desperation of someone trying to make the best of captivity while maintaining dignity. He found himself visiting her workroom more often than he should, inventing excuses to check on her progress, to ask questions about her healing methods, anything that gave him a reason to be in her presence, to hear her voice, to watch the way concentration creased her brow when she worked. Their conversations started out stilted and careful, both of them dancing around the enormous complications between them, neither willing to acknowledge the attraction that sparked every time they were in the same room. But gradually the exchanges became more natural, more honest. She told him about growing up in hiding, constantly moving from camp to camp, always one step ahead of his patrols, learning healing magic from her grandmother while her father trained warriors for rebellion. A childhood defined by fear and secrecy, by the constant awareness that discovery meant death for her entire family. Her grandmother had been the last surviving healer from before the purges, had spent decades preserving the old knowledge, teaching Alara not just the techniques of healing, but the philosophy behind it, the belief that all life was sacred and deserving of protection. That power should be used to nurture rather than destroy. It was a worldview so different from what Thaddeus had learned that it might as well have come from another planet. His father had taught him that power was a zero-sum game, that mercy was indistinguishable from weakness, that the only way to maintain control was through fear and overwhelming force. Yet hearing Alara describe her grandmother's teachings made him question things he had always accepted as truth, made him wonder if the empire he had built was actually as secure as he believed, or whether it was one spark away from burning down because it was founded on fear rather than loyalty. In turn, he told her things he had never shared with anyone, admitted the crushing weight of his father's expectations, the brutal lessons about power and control that had shaped him from childhood. The day he had taken the throne by killing his own father in ritual combat because that was the only way succession happened in their world. Blood and violence passed down through generations like a curse. He told her about the loneliness of absolute power, the isolation that came from being feared rather than loved, the growing suspicion that everything he had built was hollow at its core. That respect maintained through terror wasn't real respect at all, but simply the mask people wore to avoid becoming his next victim. These conversations happened late at night when the fortress was quiet and the rest of the world felt far away. Just the two of them in her workroom, surrounded by herbs and moonlight, sharing pieces of themselves they had never trusted to anyone else. 3 weeks passed in this strange limbo. 3 weeks of careful conversations and stolen glances. 3 weeks of Thaddeus feeling something crack open in his chest every time she smiled at him. 3 weeks of Alara slowly letting her guard down, allowing herself to see the man beneath the crown. It was during one of these nights, exactly 3 weeks after her arrival, that she asked him about the purges, about the systematic extermination of magic bloodlines that his father had orchestrated in the 1970s when Thaddeus had been his second-in-command and primary enforcer. He could have lied, could have claimed he was just following orders, could have minimized his role in the atrocities that had decimated her people. But something about the way she looked at him, seeing straight through every defense he had ever built, made dishonesty impossible. So he told her the truth, that he had led many of the raids personally, that he had believed his father's propaganda about magic users being too dangerous to exist alongside normal werewolves, that he had executed families, burned villages, erased entire bloodlines from existence in the name of consolidating power and maintaining order, that he had never questioned whether it was right, had never considered that the people he was killing might be innocent, might be healers and teachers and farmers who happened to possess abilities that frightened those in power. Alara listened without interruption, her face unreadable in the candlelight. When he finished, there was a long silence. He waited for her condemnation, for her disgust, for her to finally see him as the monster he truly was. Instead, she reached across the table and took his hand. Her touch was warm, her fingers threading through his with a gentleness that made his chest ache. "I should hate you," she said quietly. "Every rational part of my brain tells me I should hate you. You killed my grandmother's sisters. You burned villages where my cousins lived. You are personally responsible for so much suffering among my people." She paused, and he braced himself for the rejection he deserved. "But I don't hate you. I don't understand why, but I don't. Maybe because I've seen you changing these past weeks. Maybe because I felt something when I healed you that I can't explain. Maybe because my grandmother taught me that people can grow beyond their worst actions if they choose to." Her thumb stroked across his knuckles, and the simple gesture sent electricity through his entire body. "I'm not forgiving you. I can't forgive what was done to my family, but I'm willing to believe that you can become someone different, someone better, if you truly want to." The words hit him like a physical blow, not condemnation but challenge, not hatred but conditional hope. It was more than he deserved and less than he wanted, and somehow exactly what he needed to hear. The breakthrough came the next morning. A warrior was brought to the medical wing with silver poisoning, the same kind that had nearly killed Thaddeus during the ambush. The palace doctors were at a loss, their conventional treatments proving ineffective against the aggressive toxin. The warrior was fading fast, his body shutting down as the poison spread through his system. Thaddeus made the decision to ask for Alara's help, knowing it would reveal to everyone the truth about his own survival, knowing it would raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. But watching someone die when he knew she could save them felt like a line he couldn't cross, a betrayal of the mercy she had shown him. He found her in the gardens, hands deep in soil, tending to medicinal herbs, with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. She looked up at his approach, and he saw her read the urgency in his face before he spoke. "There's a warrior dying into the medical wing. Silver poisoning, the same kind that almost killed me. The doctors can't help him." Understanding dawned in her expression, followed immediately by calculation. She knew what he was asking, knew that healing this warrior publicly would expose her magic to his entire council, would make her either an asset they wanted to control or a threat they wanted to eliminate. "This will change everything," she said, and it wasn't a question. "I know, but I can't watch him die when you can save him." She studied him for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw. The tyrant who had killed her family, the man who had brought her here against her will, or something else, something newer and more fragile. Finally, she stood brushing soil from her hands. "Take me to him." The medical wing was crowded when they arrived. The dying warrior's family, several council members, including Vivian and Garrett Palace doctors, standing helplessly by. Everyone turned when Thaddeus entered with Alara, their faces showing confusion and hope in equal measure. Ilara moved to the warrior's bedside without hesitation, her hands already beginning to glow with that soft violet light. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait for approval, simply did what she had been born to do, what her grandmother had trained her to do. She healed. The room fell silent as magic filled the space, ancient power that none of them had ever witnessed flowing from her hands into the warrior's ravaged body. The black veins of silver poisoning became visible on his skin, spreading like dark lightning from the wound site. Alara's light followed those veins, chasing the poison through his system, breaking it down and purging it. It took hours, exhausting, painstaking hours where she poured her own life force into preserving his. Thaddeus watched her face grow pale with effort, saw the strain in every line of her body, and felt something crack open in his chest. This was who she was at her core, not Ashmont or rebel or enemy, but a healer who couldn't watch suffering without trying to fix it, who gave of herself without thought for the Kishta or the politics or the danger. When the warrior finally opened his eyes, weak but clearly going to survive, the room erupted in whispers, awe and fear mixing in equal measure. They had just witnessed magic that shouldn't exist, wielded by someone who by all rights should have been their prisoner or corpse. The political implications were staggering. But Thaddeus could only think about the exhaustion on Alara's face, the way she swayed on her feet from the effort of the healing, how she looked despite being drained to the point of collapse. He caught her before she could fall, lifted her into his arms without thinking about propriety or appearances, let his counsel stare in shock as he carried her back to her chambers, her head resting against his chest, her breath warm against his neck. He laid her gently on the bed, brushed the dark hair back from her face, and felt his heart clench at how fragile she looked in that moment, how much of herself she had just given to save a stranger who was technically her enemy. Garrett was waiting outside when he emerged, his expression troubled. "My lord, we need to discuss what just happened. The council is in an uproar. Half of them want to weaponize her abilities, and the other half want her executed as too dangerous to live." Thaddeus turned to face his oldest friend, and whatever Garrett saw in his face made the colonel take a step back. "Anyone who threatens her answers to me personally. Make that clear to the council. She is under my protection, and that protection is absolute." The words came out as a growl, his wolf rising close to the surface, territorial and possessive, in a way he had never felt before. Garrett's eyes widened slightly, understanding dawning. "You care for her. Truly care for her." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact, an observation from someone who had known him for nearly a century. Thaddeus didn't deny it, couldn't deny what was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone around him. "She saved my life. She saved that warrior's life. She has power that could change everything we know about healing and magic. And yes, I care for her. More than is wise. More than is safe." Garrett was quiet for a moment, processing this admission. Then slowly he nodded. "Then we'll protect her. Together. The way we've protected everything else that matters." The simple loyalty in those words, the unconditional support from the man who had fought beside him through a century of conflicts, nearly undid Thaddeus completely. He clasped Garrett's shoulder in silent gratitude, unable to trust his voice. When Alara woke hours later, evening light streaming through the windows, Thaddeus was still there, sitting in a chair beside her bed, watching her sleep with an expression that would have shocked anyone who knew his reputation. She smiled at him, soft and genuine, and asked if the warrior had survived. "He's recovering well. You saved his life just as you saved mine." She made a dismissive gesture as if performing medical miracles was nothing special. "It's what I do. It's what I've always done. Most people with your power would have used it as a weapon rather than a tool for healing, would have let enemies die without a second thought. Your compassion is extraordinary, not ordinary." She looked uncomfortable with the praise, changed the subject. "Your council saw everything. They know what I am now, what I can do. That makes me either valuable or dangerous. Probably both. You're under my protection. No one will touch you." The certainty in his voice seemed to surprise her. She studied his face, and he let her see the truth written there, the feelings he could no longer hide or deny. "Why?" she asked softly. Why are you doing this? You could use me as leverage against my father, could force him to heal your warriors while keeping me prisoner, could eliminate me as a threat. Why protect me instead? The question deserved honesty, demanded it. Because in 3 weeks you've shown me more mercy and compassion than I've experienced in 2 centuries. Because watching you heal that warrior reminded me that power doesn't have to be about destruction. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I could be someone better than the monster I've been. He paused, then added a dangerous truth. And because I care for you deeply, more than is wise or safe. The confession hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them was ready to fully explore. Ilara's eyes widened, her breath catching. For a moment he thought she would reject him, would point out all the reasons why anything between them was impossible. Instead, she reached up and cupped his face with both hands, her touch gentle and grounding. I shouldn't feel anything for you. You represent everything I've fought against my entire life, everything my father has sacrificed for, the system that killed my family and forced us into hiding. Her thumb stroked across his cheekbones, and he leaned into her touch like a man starved for affection. But I do feel something powerful and terrifying and completely insane. And I don't know if that makes me a traitor or just human. He closed the distance between them, then kissing her with all the pent-up longing of 6 weeks searching and 3 weeks wanting. She responded immediately, her hands sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. The kiss was everything he had imagined and nothing he was prepared for. Intense and gentle, desperate and tender, wrong and absolutely right, all at once. They broke apart eventually, both breathing hard, foreheads resting together. The world outside that room still existed with all its complications and impossibilities. But for this moment, there was only the two of them building something fragile and precious on the ruins of generations of hatred. The next morning brought consequences as he had known it would. A messenger arrived at dawn with an arrow shot through the main gate wrapped around a stone, thrown with enough force to crack the courtyard pavement. The message was from Commander Rowan Ashmont, and it was exactly what Thaddeus had expected. Terse, direct, threatening. Return my daughter within 3 days or face war. She is being held against her will. This is kidnapping, not protection. Blood will answer for blood. But it was the postscript that caught his attention. A personal note to Ilara asking if she was all right, if she was being held against her will, promising that rescue was possible if she gave the signal. The concern was genuine, the love behind it undeniable, and Thaddeus felt a twist of something that might have been jealousy or shame or both. He brought the message to Ilara, immediately watched her read it with tears forming in her eyes. Clearly torn between relief that her father still cared and distress that he thought she needed rescuing. I need to write to him, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Need to explain that I'm staying by choice, that I'm not being mistreated, that attacking the fortress would only result in unnecessary deaths on both sides. Thaddeus agreed without hesitation. Her father deserved honesty, even if that honesty complicated everything. Even if it meant revealing that his daughter had feelings for the man who represented everything the resistance fought against. He left her to write her response, giving her privacy to find the right words. Words that would reassure without revealing too much. That would buy them time to figure out what this thing between them actually was. When she finished an hour later, her letter was careful and measured. She explained that she was being treated well, that she had medical facilities and resources she could never access, in hiding that Thaddeus had shown her unexpected kindness. She didn't mention the kiss, didn't mention the feelings developing between them. But she made clear that she was staying by choice, at least for now, and that her father should not attack. The coded message beneath the surface was clear enough. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. This is complicated, but I'm not in immediate danger. Whether Rowan would accept that reassurance or interpret it as proof of manipulation remained to be seen. Thaddeus sent the message with his fastest courier, then called an emergency council meeting. He needed to address what had happened in the medical wing, needed to establish clear boundaries about Ilara's status and protection before Vivian or the others could organize opposition. The Great Hall was tense when he entered, his council already gathered and clearly agitated. Vivian looked particularly hostile, her sharp features set in disapproving lines. Thomas Blackwell, his military commander, appeared troubled but thoughtful. Helena Whitmore seemed uncertain, caught between loyalty and concern. Only Garrett looked calm, standing at his usual position to the right of the throne, ready to support whatever his king decided. Thaddeus didn't waste time with pleasantries. Dr. Ilara Ashmont saved a warrior's life yesterday using abilities that none of our conventional doctors possess. She is a resource this fortress cannot afford to lose, and she is under my personal protection. Those are the facts. Now tell me your concerns. Vivian spoke first as he had known she would. My lord, she is the daughter of our greatest enemy. Her presence here is a security risk. Her abilities, while impressive, could just as easily be used against us. We should be treating her as a valuable prisoner, not an honored guest. Thomas added his perspective. The men are confused about her status. Is she hostage alley guest? The ambiguity is causing uncertainty in the ranks. We need clear protocols about her access and movements. Helena raised a different concern. The lesser packs are already questioning your judgment, my lord. Word has spread that you've brought an Ashmont into the fortress. Some are interpreting this as weakness, as sentiment overriding strategy. All valid concerns, all reasonable objections, and all meaningless compared to what he felt when he looked at Alara, when he remembered her exhausting herself to save a stranger, when he recalled the way she had cupped his face and admitted she felt something too. Dr. Ashmont will continue to have access to the medical facilities and gardens. She will be treated with respect by everyone in this fortress. She will not be interrogated, threatened, or used as a political pawn. And anyone who has a problem with those terms can bring their concerns directly to me. The room went silent. The challenge was clear. Object to his decisions and face him personally. It was the kind of absolute authority he had wielded for 179 years. But this time it felt different. This time he was using his power to protect rather than dominate. Vivian's face hardened. My lord, with all due respect, you're allowing your personal feelings to compromise your judgment. This woman has gotten under your skin, and it's affecting your ability to lead effectively. The accusation was accurate enough that he couldn't fully deny it, but he also wouldn't apologize for it. My personal feelings are my own concern. Dr. Ashmont has proven her value by saving lives. That's all the justification I need for my decisions. It wasn't the full truth, wasn't even close to the full truth, but it was all he was willing to admit in front of his council. The meeting continued for another hour, hashing out protocols and security measures that would satisfy everyone's concerns while preserving Alara's freedom as much as possible. By the end, they had reached a workable compromise. Alara would continue her medical work with some restrictions on movement and required guard escorts outside the fortress walls. It wasn't perfect. It still amounted to comfortable captivity. But it was better than the alternatives, and it would buy them time. As the council filed out, Garrett lingered behind. When they were alone, he spoke quietly. Vivian isn't wrong, you know. You are compromised. We all see it. The question is whether this woman is worth the political capital you're spending on her. Thaddeus looked at his oldest friend, the man who had stood beside him through everything. Is she worth it? I don't know. I can't see the future any better than you can. All I know is that for the first time in 2 centuries, I feel like I might be capable of being something other than what my father made me. And that possibility is worth almost any cost. Garrett studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Then we'll make it work. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The simple loyalty, the unconditional support reminded Thaddeus why Garrett had remained his second for nearly a century. Why trust, despite all his philosophical objections to it, was sometimes worth the risk. The 3 days came and went without incident. No attack materialized. No further messages arrived from Rowan Ashmont. The silence was somehow more unnerving than threats would have been, suggesting that Alara's father was reevaluating the situation, planning rather than reacting. Thaddeus tried not to think too hard about what that planning might involve. Instead, he focused on the strange new reality developing within the fortress walls. Alara continued her medical work, treating servants and warriors with equal care, her reputation growing among the pack members who benefited from her skills. She was careful, cautious, aware that she was walking a political tightrope. But she was also increasingly comfortable, increasingly willing to smile at him when they passed in hallways, increasingly open during their late-night conversations. Their relationship deepened in ways that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Stolen moments became routine encounters. Careful distance evolved into easy familiarity. The attraction that had sparked from the beginning grew into something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to love. 5 weeks after her arrival, Garrett came to Thaddeus's chambers at midnight with evidence that turned his blood cold. Encrypted communications between Vivian and 3 other council members. Plans for a coordinated strike during the next full moon ceremony. Not to kill him, but to remove Alara permanently. They're not planning rebellion against you, Garrett explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. They're planning to eliminate what they see as the source of your compromise. They believe that with Dr. Ashmont gone, you'll return to your old self. Thaddeus felt rage kindle in his chest, hot and immediate, but beneath it was something colder. Disappointment. He had known Vivian, harbored doubts, but attempted murder crossed a line he couldn't ignore. How long have you known? 48 hours. I needed to be certain before bringing this to you. The evidence is irrefutable. Arrest them, all 4, but do it quietly. No public spectacle until we understand the full scope. The next morning, Vivian Sterling, Thomas Blackwell, and 2 junior council members found themselves in the fortress's interrogation chambers. Not the dungeons, not cells meant for enemies, but secure rooms designed for internal investigations. A distinction that mattered even now. Thaddeus met with them, personally, Garrett at his side, the evidence laid out on the table between them. Vivian didn't deny her involvement, didn't make excuses or beg for mercy. She simply met his gaze with the same fearless directness she had always shown. You've become weak, she said simply. That woman has made you soft, and soft leaders get their people killed. I lost my son 22 years ago because someone showed mercy to the wrong person. The rebel who killed him had been captured twice before, and twice your father ordered him released as a gesture of goodwill to the resistance. That mercy got my boy killed. Thaddeus felt the words like a physical blow. He had known Vivian lost her son, had never known the full story of how. I won't watch it happen again, she continued. I can't. Every time I see you look at that Ashmont woman, I see my son's blood. I see weakness that will get more people killed. So yes, I plan to eliminate her, and I'd do it again if given the chance, because I believe it's necessary. The room fell silent. The other 3 conspirators looked terrified, clearly expecting immediate execution. But Vivian simply waited, chin raised, ready to face whatever judgment he delivered. Thaddeus found himself thinking about Alara, about what she would say if she were here, about her grandmother's teachings that all life was sacred, that people could grow beyond their worst actions if they chose to. I'm not executing you, Vivian. Despite your plans to execute someone under my protection, you have a choice. Swear renewed loyalty and accept the changing direction, or take exile with your life intact and a generous pension to honor your decades of service. Vivian's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composure. Why? The question came out hoarse. I just admitted I'd kill her again. Because Dr. Ashmont is teaching me that strength doesn't always have to look like what my father taught me. Because your son's death was a tragedy, but answering it with more death doesn't honor his memory. Because I understand your fear, even if I can't accept your methods. He leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. And because if I execute everyone who questions my judgment, I'll end up alone in this fortress with nothing but corpses for company. That's not strength, that's paranoia. My father's paranoia, and I'm trying to be better than he was. The other 3 council members chose exile immediately, clearly relieved to escape with their lives. But Vivian sat in silence for a long moment, something working behind her eyes. Finally, she spoke. I still think you're wrong. I still believe this woman is dangerous, and that your feelings for her will bring disaster. But I've served the Ravencroft line for 63 years. Served your father and then you. And in all that time, I've never once seen you acknowledge that you might be wrong about something. She stood slowly, formally, and placed her hand over her heart in the old gesture of fealty. I'll stay, I'll serve, and I'll hope that you prove me wrong, because if you prove me right, we'll all pay the price. But at least you're trying to be something different than what came before. There's honor in that. My son would have appreciated it. The words cost her something. Thaddeus could see the effort it took to say them, the grief and fear still burning beneath the surface. But she had chosen loyalty over her own certainty, and that deserved respect. Thank you, Vivian. Your service has always been valued, even when we disagreed. After the others were escorted out, Garrett remained behind. That was well done, my lord. Mercy without weakness. Your father would never have managed it. My father would have had all four executed before breakfast and their bodies displayed on the walls as a warning, and he would have called it strength. And you call it what? Fear. He was afraid every moment of his life. Afraid of challengers, afraid of change, afraid of appearing weak. That fear made him cruel, made him see threats everywhere, even where none existed. Thaddeus stood moved to the window overlooking the training grounds. I'm tired of ruling through fear, Garrett. Tired of building a kingdom where loyalty is just terror wearing a mask. If Alara has taught me anything, it's that there might be another way. A harder way, certainly, but maybe a way that actually lasts beyond the next coup attempt. You're in love with her. It wasn't a question. Garrett said it with the calm certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. Yes. Does she know? I've told her I care for her, haven't used the word love yet. That feels like too much, too fast, even though I felt it the moment she healed me in that forest. Garrett was quiet for a moment, then smiled slightly. For what it's worth, I think she feels the same way she looks at you when you're not watching. It's the same way you look at her. The observation made Thaddeus's heart clench with something that felt dangerously close to hope. 6 weeks after Alara's arrival, the fortress had settled into its new normal. The conspiracy had been dealt with quietly, the other council members accepting that Alara was now a permanent fixture. Not everyone was happy about it, but most recognized that their king's protection was absolute. Alara's reputation as a healer had grown exponentially. Warriors who would have died from infected wounds now walked the training grounds full of praise for the woman with the violet eyes and healing hands. Servants who had suffered for years with chronic ailments found relief through her treatments. Even some of the lesser pack representatives who visited the fortress specifically requested consultations with her. She was becoming indispensable. And perhaps more importantly, she was becoming respected in her own right, not just as the king's, whatever she was. Guest, ward, something more that neither of them had named yet. It was on one of these quiet evenings, with winter beginning to settle over the Cascade Mountains, that Thaddeus found Alara in her workroom. She was preparing salves for the coming cold season, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she mixed herbs and oils in precise ratios. He watched her from the doorway for a moment, struck by how natural she looked here. How much this felt like where she belonged. Not hidden in forest camps constantly running, but here in this fortress that had never known gentleness until she arrived. She looked up, sensing his presence, and smiled. The genuine warmth in that expression made his chest tight. Your warriors are getting sloppy, she said without preamble. I've treated 6 training injuries this week. They're not warming up properly before sparring. I'll speak with the training masters. Or we could institute a stretching routine, 5 minutes before every session. It would reduce injuries by at least 40%. He found himself smiling at her casual assumption that her suggestion would be implemented. And the truth was, it would be, because she was usually right about these things, and because his warriors had started looking to her for guidance on medical matters without even realizing they were doing it. Come with me, he said impulsively. There's something I want to show you. She set down her mortar and pestle, wiped her hands on a cloth, and followed him through the fortress to a door she had never been through before. It led to the battlements, the high walls that overlooked the forest and mountains beyond. The view was spectacular. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and red, turning the snow-capped peaks of the Cascades into something otherworldly. The forest stretched out below them, dark and vast and beautiful. Alara moved to the edge, leaning against the stone parapet, her face lifted to the wind. For a moment, she looked so free, so alive, that Thaddeus forgot how to breathe. It's beautiful, she said softly. I've been inside those walls for 6 weeks, and I forgot how big the world is. I come up here sometimes, he admitted, moving to stand beside her, when the weight of everything gets too heavy. When I need to remember that there's more to existence than counsels and strategies and maintaining power. How often? More since you arrived, less before. She turned to look at him, and in the fading light her eyes seemed to glow with their own inner fire. Why, well, because you make me want to be better than I am. Because you've shown me that strength doesn't have to look like brutality. Because when I'm with you, I feel less like a king and more like a monk, and I'd forgotten what that felt like. He turned to face her, fully taking her hands in his. I know this is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't feel what we feel. But I can't keep pretending anymore, Laura. I can't keep acting like my feelings for you are just friendship or gratitude or political convenience. Her breath caught her fingers tightening around his. What are you saying? I'm saying that I love you. That I've loved you since that moment in the forest when you saved my life for no reason beyond compassion. That I've been falling deeper every day since you came here. That you terrify me and exhilarate me and make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. He lifted one hand to cup her face, his thumb stroking across her cheekbone. I'm saying that if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I want to build something with you. Not just survive the political complications, but actually build a future. Together, a better future than the past either of us came from. Tears were streaming down her face now, and he couldn't tell if they were happy or sad or both. I love you too, she whispered. I shouldn't. I know I shouldn't. My father would see this as the ultimate betrayal. Everything he's fought for, everything he's sacrificed, and his daughter falls in love with the tyrant he's been trying to overthrow for decades. She laughed the sound half-sob. But I do. I love you. And I don't know how to reconcile that with everything else, but I can't deny it anymore. You're not the monster your reputation suggests. You're complicated and damaged and trying so hard to be better. And I see that. I see you. He kissed her, then slow and deep, pouring everything he felt into the connection. She responded immediately, her arms wrapping around his neck, holding him close as if she was afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads resting together. This is going to be complicated, Alara said. I know. My father will be furious. I expect nothing less. Your counsel thinks we're both insane. They might be right. She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then we'll be insane together. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms under a darkening sky, Thaddeus felt something he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. Not just hope, but certainty. Certainty that whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together. He didn't know if love would be enough to bridge the divide between their worlds. Didn't know if they could build something lasting on the ruins of so much hatred and bloodshed. But for the first time in 224 years, he was willing to try. Willing to risk everything he had built for the chance of something better. And that wanting that hope that love was the most dangerous and most precious thing he had ever possessed. The message arrived 2 weeks later at dawn on a frost-covered morning. Not an arrow shot over the walls this time, but a formal envoy. 3 wolves under a flag of truce bearing a letter sealed with the Ashmont Resistance crest. Commander Rowan Ashmont requested a meeting. Neutral ground, no weapons beyond personal sidearms. Just 2 leaders talking about the future of their people and the fate of one woman who stood between them. Thaddeus read the letter 3 times, looking for threats or tricks, but found only straightforward diplomacy. Rowan wasn't coming to attack. He was coming to judge, to see for himself whether his daughter was truly choosing this life or simply making the best of captivity. He'll try to kill you, Vivian said flatly when Thaddeus presented the request to his council. This is a trap. He'll say he wants to talk, then put a silver bullet in your skull the moment you drop your guard. If he wanted me dead, he could have sent assassins, Thaddeus countered. Could have launched a full assault on the fortress. This letter is genuine. He wants to talk. Because his daughter asked him to, Garrett added quietly. Dr. Ashmont has been writing to him regularly, explaining the situation, asking him to give this a chance. He's coming because she requested it, not because he wants to negotiate. Thomas Blackwell leaned forward, his tactical mind already working through scenarios. If we're doing this, we need to choose the location carefully. Somewhere neither side has advantage. Somewhere with clear sight lines and multiple exit routes in case it goes wrong. The old logging camp at Miller's Ridge, Helena suggested. Abandoned for 20 years but still structurally sound. Open ground on all sides. 3 hours from here, 4 hours from known resistance positions. Neither side can pre-position forces without the other knowing. Thaddeus nodded slowly. Set it up. 1 week from today. I'll bring Garrett and 2 guards. Rowan can bring equivalent. Alara will be there as well. My lord, is that wise? Vivian's voice was carefully neutral, but he could hear the concern beneath. If this goes badly, you could lose both your life and the leverage she represents. She's not leverage, Vivian. She's the woman I love, and she deserves to see her father. To prove to him that she's here by choice. That this isn't manipulation or Stockholm Syndrome, but something real. The council fell silent at that declaration. He had never said it so baldly before, never put it in such clear terms, but the time for subtlety was past. If they were going to build something new, it had to be founded on truth, not political convenience. Then we'll make it work, Garrett said simply, and the others nodded agreement. Even Vivian, though her expression suggested she thought this was a terrible idea. Alara's reaction to the news was complicated. Joy at the prospect of seeing her father mixed with terror about how that meeting might go. She spent the next week in a state of nervous energy, constantly revising what she would say, how she would explain, how she would make him understand. He raised me to believe that the Ravencrofts were the enemy of our people, she told Thaddeus one night, her voice small. That everything they touched turned to ash and blood. And now I have to tell him that I've fallen in love with one, that I want to build a future with the man he spent 40 years fighting against. He loves you. He'll listen. He'll think you've brainwashed me, manipulated me, used magic or drugs or psychological tactics to make me compliant. That's what I would think if I were him. Thaddeus had no good answer to that. Because she was right. From Rowan's perspective, this looked exactly like manipulation. The only way to prove otherwise was to let father and daughter speak privately and hope that Rowan could see the truth in his daughter's eyes. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Security protocols, backup plans, medical supplies in case things went violent. Thaddeus found himself hoping desperately that they wouldn't need any of it, that this meeting could happen without bloodshed, that maybe, just maybe, they could start building bridges instead of burning them. Miller's Ridge looked exactly as Helena had described, an abandoned logging camp from the early 2000s before the Forest Service had shut down operations in this section of the Cascades. A few buildings remained standing, weathered but intact. The clearing around them offered 300 yards of open ground in every direction, perfect for a meeting where trust was tentative at best. Thaddeus arrived first as protocol demanded. He came with Garrett, 2 guards, and Alara. They positioned themselves near the largest building, backs to the wall. Good sight lines on all approaches. Rowan Ashmont appeared exactly on time, emerging from the tree line to the north with 3 companions. All of them moved like warriors, but none reached for weapons. They walked openly across the clearing, hands visible, posture non-threatening despite the tension radiating from every line of their bodies. As they got closer, Thaddeus got his first good look at Commander Rowan Ashmont. The man was in his mid-50s, weathered by decades of fighting and living rough. Gray threaded through his dark hair, and scars marked his face and hands. But his eyes were sharp and clear, and they fixed immediately on his daughter, with an intensity that made Thaddeus's chest tight. Alara. The single word carried a weight of emotion. Relief, fear, love, anger, all of it compressed into 2 syllables. Father. Alara moved forward slowly, and Thaddeus had to physically restrain himself from following. Had to trust that she could handle this conversation, that she didn't need him hovering protectively. Rowan met her halfway, his hands reaching out to grip her shoulders, his eyes searching her face as if looking for signs of trauma or coercion. Are you all right? Has he hurt you, threatened you? Are you here because you want to be, or because you have to be? The questions came rapid fire, desperate, and Alara answered each one with calm patience. I'm fine. He hasn't hurt me. No one has threatened me. And I'm here because I choose to be father, not because I have to, because I want to. Rowan's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking past her to Thaddeus. He's done something to you, brainwashed you somehow. You would never willingly stay with a Ravencroft. No, he hasn't. Father, please listen. I know this is hard to understand, but things have changed. He's changing. The man you taught me to fear before isn't the man standing behind me. He killed your great-aunts, burned villages where your cousins lived, led the purges that destroyed our people. How can you defend him? I'm not defending what he did. I can't forgive those actions, and neither can he. But people can grow beyond their worst selves if they choose to. Grandmother taught me that. You taught me that. Rowan's expression cracked slightly, pain flashing across his features. Your grandmother also taught you that the Ravencrofts were dangerous, that they ruled through fear and violence, that they would never change because change would mean admitting weakness. She was right about who they were, but she's also the one who taught me that healing means seeing potential, not just damage. And Father, I see potential here, for something better, for peace, Vama. The word hung in the air between them, radical and terrifying. Rowan's hands dropped from her shoulders. He took a step back, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. You're in love with him. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation delivered with the flat certainty of someone stating an unbearable truth. Alara didn't flinch, didn't deny, simply lifted her chin and met her father's gaze directly. Yes, I am. The clearing fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Rowan's response. Behind Thaddeus, he heard Garrett shift slightly, hand moving closer to his sidearm, ready to respond if this turned violent. But Rowan just stood there looking at his daughter with an expression of such profound grief that Thaddeus felt it like a knife to the chest. I've failed you, Rowan said quietly. Failed to protect you. Failed to keep you safe from the very danger I spent your entire life warning you about. This is my fault. No, Alara said fiercely. No, Father. This isn't failure. This isn't you failing to protect me. This is me making my own choice, my own path. And yes, it's complicated and messy and probably insane, but it's mine. My decision. My future. She reached out, taking her father's hands in hers. I need you to trust me. Trust that I know what I'm doing. Trust that I'm not being manipulated or coerced. Trust that the woman you raised to be strong and independent and compassionate is still making decisions based on those values. Rowan looked down at their joined hands and Thaddeus saw the war playing out on his face. The desire to protect warring with the need to respect. The instinct to fight wording with the knowledge that some battles couldn't be won with violence. I want to talk to him, Rowan said finally. If you're truly choosing this, if you're truly making this decision freely, then I need to understand why. Need to hear from him what he thinks he's building here. Ilara nodded slowly, then turned to look at Thaddeus. Their eyes met across the distance, and he saw the trust in her gaze. The faith that he could handle this conversation. The belief that he could make her father understand. He moved forward, leaving his guards behind, leaving even Garrett. Just himself and Rowan Ashmont, two leaders who had been enemies for longer than either cared to remember, finally facing each other without weapons drawn. Commander Ashmont, King Ravencroft. The titles felt almost ridiculous in the open air, formal and weighted, when what they were really talking about was a man's daughter and the future she had chosen. I won't insult you by asking permission to love Alara, Thaddeus said bluntly. That decision has already been made by both of us. But I will answer any question you have, honestly, without political spin or diplomatic evasion. You deserve that much. Rowan studied him for a long moment, eyes sharp and assessing. Why, by her, of all the women in your territories, why did you fixate on my daughter? Because she saved my life when she had every reason to let me die. Because she showed me mercy I didn't deserve and compassion I had never experienced. Because in those moments when she healed me, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 centuries. Hope, connection, the possibility of being something other than what I was. And what were you, Igewen? A tyrant, a man who ruled through fear because that's all my father taught me. A king who built an empire on blood and terror and called it strength. Your daughter showed me that there might be another way. A harder way, certainly, but one that doesn't require me to be a monster. Rowan's jaw tightened. Pretty words, but you're still the man who led the purges, who destroyed families and burned villages, who created the conditions that forced my people into hiding for 50 years. How do I trust that you're not just using my daughter to neutralize the resistance, to make us lower our guard so you can destroy us more effectively? The question was fair, deserved an answer that didn't hide from the truth. You don't. Trust isn't something I can demand or prove with words. All I can offer is action. I've changed policies since Alara arrived. Stopped executing resistance prisoners. Started listening to grievances from the lesser packs. Stopped treating dissent as treason. Small changes, yes, but changes nonetheless. Because she manipulated you into it. No, because she showed me that strength doesn't always have to look like brutality. That mercy isn't weakness. That building something lasting requires more than fear and domination. Thaddeus paused, choosing his next words carefully. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness for what I've done. But I am asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, we can build something better than the cycle of violence we've been trapped in. For your daughter's sake, if nothing else. Rowan was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving between Thaddeus and Alara, who stood watching from a distance. If you hurt her, he said finally, voice low and deadly, if you betray her or use her or break her heart, I will kill you. I don't care how many guards you have or how fortified your fortress is. I will find a way and I will end you. That's not a threat. It's a promise. I would expect nothing less. If I were you, I would say exactly the same thing. But if you're genuine, Rowan continued, and something in his voice softened slightly, if you truly are trying to be better than what you were then, I'm willing to explore what peace might look like, not for your sake, not even for mine, but for Alara, because she's chosen this path, and I have to trust that the woman I raised knows what she's doing. Relief flooded through Thaddeus, so intense it was almost physical. Thank you. That's more than I had any right to expect. Don't thank me yet. We're a long way from peace. This is just the first step. A willingness to talk instead of just fighting. Everything else remains to be seen. Before either of them could say more, a sound split the air. A howl, then another, then a dozen voices rising in chorus coming from the south. Not Rowan's people, not Thaddeus's, someone else. Garrett's voice cut through the confusion, sharp and urgent. Contact South Ridge, multiple hostiles, moving fast. Thaddeus spun his wolf, rising instantly to the surface, preparing for combat. Beside him, Rowan did the same, and for a moment they stood back-to-back, instinct overriding politics. Alpha Constantine, one of Rowan's warriors shouted, pointing at the banner now visible on the approaching force. Northern Territories pack. Thaddeus's blood ran cold. Neston. Constantine, the most aggressive alpha in the northern regions, constantly pushing boundaries, testing for weakness. He must have learned about this meeting, seen it as an opportunity to eliminate both Thaddeus and Rowan in one strike. How many, he barked. 80, maybe 90. All battle form. Thaddeus looked at his own force. 5 counting himself. Rowan had 4. 9 warriors against 90. The math was not in their favor. Fall back to the buildings, he ordered. Defensive positions. Make them pay for every yard. But even as his people moved to comply, he knew it was hopeless. They might take down 20, maybe 30 before being overwhelmed. The best they could hope for was to buy time for Alara to escape. Then Rowan's voice cut through his tactical calculations. Or we could work together. Your people know modern combat tactics. Mine know guerrilla warfare. Between us, we might have a chance. Thaddeus looked at the commander, saw the same calculation in his eyes. The same desperate hope that cooperation might tip the scales. Agreed. What do you need? Your people hold the center, use the buildings for cover. My people will flank, hit them from the trees. Classic pincer. If we can force them into a bottleneck, we can even the numbers. It was a good plan, better than anything Thaddeus could have devised in the next 30 seconds. He started issuing orders, his people and Rowan's moving as a single unit, decades of enmity forgotten in the face of immediate danger. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Constantine's forces hit hard, expecting an easy victory over a fragmented group. Instead, they found coordinated resistance. Thaddeus's warriors held the center with disciplined fire and tactical precision. Rowan's rebels struck from the flanks, appearing and disappearing like ghosts, forcing the attackers to split their attention. And in the middle of it all was Alara. She had positioned herself in the largest building, turning it into a field hospital. As wounded warriors were pulled from the fighting, both Ravencroft and Ashmont, she worked on them with equal dedication. Her violet light flashed again and again, healing wounds that should have been fatal, keeping people alive who would have died on any normal battlefield. Thaddeus caught glimpses of her between exchanges of fire, saw her hands glowing as she pressed them to a Ravencroft warrior's chest, closing a sucking wound. Saw her rush to help one of Rowan's rebels who had taken a silver bullet to the leg, purging the poison before it could spread. She saved everyone, made no distinction between sides, just healed whoever needed healing because that was who she was. The tide of battle turned slowly. Constantine's forces, expecting an easy victory, found themselves caught in a meat grinder, unable to advance against the coordinated defense, taking casualties that would have broken a less disciplined force. After an hour of brutal fighting, Constantine himself finally appeared. A massive alpha over 7 feet tall in battle form, scarred from decades of warfare. He strode through his remaining troops toward the center building where Thaddeus had taken position. Ravencroft, his voice boomed across the clearing, face me with him, king to king, or are you too much a coward now, hiding behind your pet rebels? It was a classic challenge. Ancient law said that alpha to alpha combat was binding. Win and your claim stood. Lose and your territory passed to the victor. Constantine was invoking the oldest rules of their society, forcing Thaddeus into single combat. Thaddeus stepped out of cover, rifle slung across his back, moving into the open ground. Behind him, he heard Garrett curse, but his friend knew better than to interfere. This was inevitable. Constantine moved to meet him, and they circled each other like the predators they were. You've gone soft, Ravencroft, bringing an Ashmont into your house, making deals with rebels. The territories need a strong alpha, not a lovesick fool. Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you. That attacking during a peace negotiation makes you look desperate, not strong. Like you're so threatened by the possibility of cooperation that you'd rather burn everything than risk irrelevance. Constantine snarled and launched himself forward. The fight was savage and primal, two alphas in battle form, centuries of combat experience colliding. They traded blows that would have killed normal werewolves, regenerating damage almost as fast as it was inflicted. Thaddeus was stronger, more experienced, but Constantine was younger, faster. The fight could have gone either way. Then Rowan entered the circle. 2 against 1 seems more appropriate, the commander said calmly, taking position beside Thaddeus. Since you brought 90 warriors to attack 9, seems like you enjoy unfair odds. Constantine's eyes widened with rage. This is alpha combat, interference is forbidden. I'm not your subject, Rowan pointed out. Your laws don't apply to me. And frankly, I'm tired of watching honorless thugs hide behind tradition when it suits them and ignore it when it doesn't. Thaddeus felt something shift in that moment. Rowan Ashmont standing beside him, fighting with him, not against him. 2 men who should have been enemies, working together against a common threat. The fight lasted another 5 minutes. Constantine was good, but not good enough to face 2 experienced warriors simultaneously. When he finally went down Silverblade through the chest, his remaining forces scattered, recognizing that their alpha's claim had been invalidated by his death. In the aftermath, as the adrenaline faded and the scope of what had happened became clear, Thaddeus found himself standing next to Rowan in the center of the clearing, both of them bloodied and exhausted. You could have let me fight alone, Thaddeus said quietly. Let Constantine kill me, then negotiated with whoever took power next. Might have been easier than dealing with me. Rowan snorted, wiping blood from his face. And have to tell my daughter I let you die. No thank you, she would never forgive me. Besides, Constantine was an ass. The territories are better off without him. They stood in silence for a moment, then Rowan extended his hand. Temporary truce becomes permanent ceasefire, until we can hammer out actual terms. Agreed. Thaddeus took the offered hand, gripping firmly. Agreed. Alara appeared, then moving between the wounded, her clothes stained with blood, her face pale with exhaustion. But when she saw them standing together and hands clasped, something like hope bloomed in her expression. Does this mean what I think it means? It means your father and I are going to try, Thaddeus said. Try to build something better than what came before. It won't be easy, won't happen overnight, but we're willing to make the attempt. Rowan nodded slowly. 1 week from today, Ravencroft Fortress. Full negotiation teams. We'll hammer out terms for a real peace accord. Not just cessation of hostilities, but actual structural changes. Reparations for the purges, protection for magic bloodlines, representation and governance. All of it. Agreed, she. And Rowan, thank you for fighting beside me today, for giving this a chance. Don't thank me yet. We're still enemies who happen to be negotiating. But we're enemies who both love the same woman, and that gives us common ground. We'll see if it's enough. The week that followed was intense. Both sides assembled negotiation teams, drafted proposals, argued over every detail. Vivian, to her credit, threw herself into the process with the same dedication she had once shown in planning military campaigns. Rowan brought his best strategists, people who had been fighting for decades and knew exactly what they needed to secure a lasting peace. Thaddeus and Alara were together through all of it, her presence steadying him when negotiations grew heated, his support giving her the confidence to push for the changes she believed in. The final accord was signed on a cold morning in mid-December, witnessed by representatives from every major pack in the territories. The terms were comprehensive: full reparations to survivors of the purges and their descendants paid over 20 years, a seat on the Ravencroft Council for the Ashmont Resistance with full voting rights, legal protection for magic bloodlines with anti-discrimination laws enforced territory-wide, an amnesty program for resistance fighters allowing them to integrate into society without penalty, creation of a joint task force to handle disputes between packs, preventing conflicts from escalating into violence. It wasn't perfect. No treaty ever was. But it was a foundation, a place to start building something better. The signing ceremony was formal, but emotional. Rowan signed first, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. Then Thaddeus, making his mark on a document that fundamentally changed everything his family had built. As he set down the pen, he looked at Alara, who stood watching with tears streaming down her face. Tears of joy, of relief, of hope for a future that had seemed impossible just months ago. After the ceremony, after the official photographs, and the congratulations, after the representatives had departed, Thaddeus found himself alone with Alara in his private chambers. "We did it," she said, still seeming dazed. "We actually did it. Peace. Real peace. We started it," he corrected. "Built the foundation. Actually maintaining it will be the work of years, decades, maybe generations. But we started it. That's something." He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of wild roses that always clung to her. "I have something to ask you. Something I should have asked weeks ago." She pulled back to look at him, curiosity and something like nervousness in her expression. "What? Marry me?" The words came out rougher than he intended, less eloquent than he had planned. But they were honest, direct. Everything he felt compressed into two words. Alara's eyes went wide. "Marry you." Yes, not for politics, not for the peace accord, not to seal the alliance. For us. Because I love you. Because I want to build a life with you. Because I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it. She was crying again, but smiling through the tears. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." He kissed her, then slow and deep, sealing the promise they were making to each other. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing through their tears. "My father is going to have opinions about this," Alara said. "I'm counting on it, but I think he'll give his blessing. Eventually. After he's finished threatening to kill me if I hurt you." "Wait, probably." They stood together by the window looking out over the fortress and the forest beyond. Two people from different worlds building a bridge between them. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges and setbacks and people who wanted the old ways back. But they would face it together. King and healer, tyrant and savior, enemy and beloved, and maybe, just maybe, they would build something that lasted. Epilogue. 6 months later. The wedding took place on a perfect summer evening with representatives from every pack in the territories in attendance. The ceremony blended traditions from both Ravencroft and Ashmont cultures, officiated jointly by one of Thaddeus's most senior advisors and one of Rowan's trusted lieutenants. Alara wore white silk with violet accents that matched her eyes, her dark hair woven with flowers from the gardens she had tended for the past 9 months. She was radiant, glowing with happiness that made Thaddeus's chest tight. Rowan walked her down the aisle, and when he placed her hand in Thaddeus's, the commander leaned in close. "Hurt her and I'll kill you. We established this already, but I want to make sure we're clear." Crystal clear. And Rowan, "Thank you for giving us your blessing, for believing this could work. Don't make me regret it." But despite the gruff words, there was warmth in Rowan's eyes, acceptance. Perhaps even the beginnings of respect. The ceremony was beautiful. The vows were traditional, but the meaning behind them was revolutionary. Two people from enemy bloodlines promising to build a future together, promising to be better than their past. When the officiant pronounced them married, the crowd erupted in cheers, Ravencroft and Ashmont, former enemies, celebrating together. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still people on both sides who harbored grudges. But it was progress. Tangible, visible progress. At the reception, as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Laura looked up at him with those violet eyes that had changed his entire world. No regrets. Not one. You. Only that we didn't find each other sooner. We found each other when we were ready, when we could actually build something instead of just destroying each other. She laid her head against his chest, and they swayed to the music, surrounded by people who had once been enemies and were slowly becoming allies. Garrett approached as the song ended, resplendent in his formal uniform, looking more emotional than Thaddeus had seen him in decades. "My lord, my lady, congratulations. I never thought I'd see this day." "Neither did I," Thaddeus admitted. "Thank you, my friend, for standing beside me through everything, for believing change was possible even when I didn't." Garrett smiled, then did something surprising. He bowed formally to Alara. "You saved him, not just from the poison that night, but from himself. The territories are better for it. We all are." Later, much later, after the guests had departed and the fortress had settled into quiet, Thaddeus and Alara stood on the battlements where they had first confessed their love. The summer night was warm, stars brilliant overhead, the forest peaceful below. "What are you thinking?" Alara asked softly. "That I spent 2 centuries building an empire on fear, and it took one woman with violet eyes to show me that strength could look like something else. That mercy wasn't weakness. That love was the most dangerous and most valuable thing I could possess." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You vanished into the woods that night. And when I found you again, you taught me how to be human. How to be more than just a king. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." She smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him. "You saved me too. Gave me a place where I didn't have to hide. Where my abilities were valued instead of feared. Where I could heal without constantly running. We saved each other." And standing there under the stars, the king who had learned mercy and the healer who had taught compassion, they looked toward a future neither had imagined possible. A future built on hope instead of fear. On cooperation instead of domination. On love instead of hatred. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be setbacks and challenges, but they would face them together, building something better than the past they had inherited. The vanished healer had emerged from the forest, and in doing so she had transformed a kingdom, redeemed a tyrant, and proven that even the deepest divides could be bridged, one act of mercy at a time.